My name is Riley Bennett. I'm 26 years old, and until last year I didn't think I was capable of doing anything on my own. Not because I wasn't smart, not because I wasn't creative, but because the man I loved made sure I believed I was nothing without him. It started small, as these things always do. Subtle, quiet, almost invisible, unless you're the one living inside it. When I met Tyler, I was 21. I had just graduated from college with a degree in media communications, fresh out of a toxic family, and eager to start a new life. He was older, 29, with this confident smile and the kind of voice that made people stop and listen. He worked in public relations, ran a small media firm out of a shared office downtown. At the time, I thought he was everything I wanted to be: outspoken, charismatic, fearless. He was also the first person who ever told me I was talented. I still remember the way he looked at my first podcast idea. "You've got something," he said, handing my notebook back across the table. "But it needs polish. I can help you." And I let him. At first it felt like collaboration. He'd listen to my ideas, add a few refinements, tweak the tone, coach my voice. I thought we were building something together. He introduced me to people, helped me rent equipment, even came up with the name, The Echo Room. It was clever, catchy, professional. I was proud of it. But something changed after we launched. Suddenly, the episodes weren't ours. They were his. The guests he booked were his friends. The stories I pitched were too niche, too soft, too opinionated. He'd re-record my segments when I wasn't in the studio, strip the emotion out of my voice. "You sound too emotional, babe. Just trust me." So I trusted him. I kept trusting him long after I knew I shouldn't. Because every time I pushed back, he'd say something like, "I'm just trying to help you succeed. Or you'd be nothing without this show. And this show is nothing without me." And the worst part? I believed him. When you love someone who constantly questions your worth, you start to doubt your own reflection. You ask yourself, what if he's right? What if I really can't do this without him? I stopped writing, stopped pitching new ideas. I just showed up, sat in front of the mic, smiled when he needed me to, nodded when the credit went to him. But deep down, I was slowly disappearing, and no one noticed. Not my friends, who thought Tyler was charming and supportive. Not my family, who were just happy I was finally with someone stable. Not even me, really. Not until one night changed everything. It was a Friday, around 11 p.m., and we were in the studio after hours. We had just finished recording an interview with a musician I admired, someone I had personally reached out to, coordinated with, prepped for. But after the taping, Tyler leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said with that half smile, "Not bad. But let's cut your intro. You came in too soft again. I'll redo it later." And just like that, he erased me. I don't know what snapped in me. Maybe it was the way he didn't even look up when he said it. Maybe it was the months of biting my tongue. Or maybe I was just tired. Tired of being quiet in a life I built with my voice. I said no. At first he laughed. "No? What do you mean, no?" I looked him in the eye and said it again. Firmer this time. "You're not cutting my intro." He stood up. "You're emotional. You're ruining your own show." And that's when it hit me. It was never mine. He had convinced me it was. Let me hold the mic while he pulled the strings. Let me think I was leading while he mapped the path. It was never mine. Not really, so I walked out. I left the studio. I left him. I left the echo room. And I went silent. For 3 months, I didn't record, didn't speak on a platform, didn't post. I barely even told anyone what had happened. I was humiliated. Not just because I had lost the show, but because I had lost myself. But silence has a strange way of showing you what's been echoing inside you all along. I started writing again. Not scripts, not outlines, just thoughts, feelings, things I was too afraid to say when I was sitting across from him, nodding politely, swallowing my voice. I wrote about being erased, about performing strength for the sake of someone else's ego, about being called too emotional when I was just being honest. I didn't know what I was doing with it. I just knew it felt real. Then one night, at 2 a.m., I hit record. Not in a studio, not with fancy soundproofing or a pop filter. Just me, in my apartment, sitting on the floor with a mic I bought off eBay and a blanket over my head to muffle the echo. And I talked. I told my story, not the polished version, the raw one. I talked about loving someone who taught me to be ashamed of my own voice, about confusing control with protection, about mistaking silence for peace. I didn't edit it. I didn't rehearse. I uploaded it to a free hosting platform and called it Twice as Loud, because that's how I wanted to come back. Twice as loud, twice as honest, twice as me. I didn't expect anyone to hear it, but people did. First, a few downloads, then a few messages. Thank you for saying this. I thought I was the only one. I needed this today. Within a week, it had 10,000 listens. I cried when I saw the number. Not because of the success, but because I realized my voice was never broken. It was just buried. That was the beginning. I didn't know it then, but I was starting something bigger than a podcast. I was starting to reclaim my story. And Tyler? He wasn't done trying to steal it. When something starts to take off, especially something built from pain, your first instinct isn't always pride. Sometimes it's fear. That's what I felt watching the numbers rise on Twice as Loud. Not excitement, not validation, just panic. Like any minute, someone would pull the rug out and say, "Just kidding, this isn't yours either." But the messages kept coming. Not from strangers, at least not at first. The first few were from women I had gone to college with, women I barely talked to anymore. One wrote, "Riley, I listened to your podcast last night. I don't think I've ever heard someone say what I've been trying to explain for years." Another said, "He didn't deserve your voice. I'm so glad you took it back." They weren't talking about Tyler directly, but they didn't have to. The subtext was clear and painfully familiar. Apparently, my story wasn't mine alone. I kept recording. Once a week, usually at night, still using the blanket and mic setup in my bedroom. Each episode was just me and my voice. No guests, no flashy editing. I talked about things Tyler used to call emotional garbage. Things like codependency, self-silencing. That awful moment when you realize you've built a life around someone who sees you as a sidekick. I didn't name him, not yet. I wasn't ready. And honestly, I still wanted to protect him. It sounds messed up, I know, but that's the thing about emotional abuse. It doesn't leave bruises, it leaves doubts. And when you love someone who made you feel small, part of you still wants their approval, even after they're gone. That part of me clung on longer than I want to admit. But Tyler didn't give me the luxury of silence. About 6 weeks after the first episode of Twice as Loud went viral, he messaged me. Just one line. "Cute little pity project you've got there." My stomach dropped. I didn't respond. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and spent the next hour shaking. Not because I was scared of him physically, but because that one sentence brought all the old feelings back. He was watching, listening, waiting for me to slip. The next day, I got an email from a producer I had worked with back when the Echo Room was still a thing. She said she loved my new series and asked if I'd be willing to come on her live stream for an interview. My first instinct was to say no. Absolutely not. I wasn't ready. I wasn't enough yet. But something in me pushed back. Tyler always told me I wasn't ready. So I said yes. That live stream changed everything. I showed up in a basic hoodie, no makeup, my hair in a messy bun, and talked about everything. I didn't name Tyler directly, but I described what it felt like to be erased by someone you trusted. I talked about the day I walked out of the studio, about the fear of starting over with nothing but your own voice. The chat blew up. People were sharing it midstream. By the end of the week, the replay had 300,000 views. It was wild and terrifying. But it was mine. Then, Tyler made his move. A week later, the Echo Room uploaded a new episode, first one in months. The title? Don't Believe Everything You Hear. I knew before I even clicked it. The cold, slick tone in the title. It was classic Tyler. Defensive disguised as rational. Aggressive wrapped in professionalism. He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. He talked about the trend of victimhood, about how some people rewrite history when their careers stall. He used every dog whistle term in the book: emotional, difficult, unstable. I remember sitting on my couch, fists clenched, as his voice filled the room again. He said, "The truth is, some people just aren't built for leadership, and when they fail, they find someone to blame." I stared at the screen and whispered, "He still thinks he built me." I could have ignored it, could have let it slide, but this time, something in me snapped. He wanted war? I wasn't the same girl who used to tiptoe around his moods. I wasn't afraid of being called emotional anymore. I was emotional, and loud, and real. So I recorded an episode. No notes, no filters. I started it with one line. "This one's for anyone who's ever been called too much." I talked about how abuse doesn't always come in the form of shouting or bruises. Sometimes, it comes in the form of subtle digs, comments that cut just deep enough to make you question your instincts. People who lift you up just high enough to keep you dependent. I still didn't say his name, but I didn't have to. People knew, and they stood with me. That episode hit 1 million plays in 4 days. Brands reached out, not because they wanted to polish me, but because they believed in my message. I was offered speaking gigs, book deals, panels, collaboration with actual survivors and mental health advocates. For the first time in my life, my voice was being heard, and not through someone else's mic. But even in all that noise, I had quiet moments, alone moments, and they were the hardest. Because success doesn't erase pain. It doesn't fix the part of you that still hears your ex's voice when you're doubting yourself. Late at night, I'd still wonder, what if he's right? What if they only listen now because they want the drama? Imposter syndrome is real, even when the world is cheering for you. But then I'd get messages, real stories, from women, and even men, telling me that my words helped them leave their own versions of Tyler. One woman wrote, "I didn't know it was abuse until you described it." That message stayed with me because I realized I didn't start twice as loud to hurt Tyler. I started it to find myself. And if that meant he felt exposed, maybe it was because he finally had to hear what I'd been silencing for years. I was finally louder than his lies. But he wasn't done. A month after my viral episode, I got a legal notice. Tyler was suing me for defamation of character. I laughed when I opened the email. Not because it was funny, but because of course he did. He couldn't control my voice anymore. So now he wanted to scare me into silence. And for a minute, it almost worked. I stared at that notice for hours, heart pounding. I called a lawyer friend in a panic. "Can he do this? Can he really sue me just for telling the truth?" She said, "He can try, but you haven't named him. And even if you had, truth is a defense." That sentence lit something in me. Truth is a defense. So I did the one thing Tyler never expected. I went louder. I posted about the lawsuit. I told my audience exactly what was happening. I said, "This is what happens when women speak up. They call us liars. They call us unstable. And when that doesn't work, they threaten us with silence." The response? Overwhelming. Hashtags, shares, public figures speaking out. One organization offered to cover my legal fees. Another invited me to keynote their next summit. Tyler tried to silence me, but the whole world turned up the volume. And that's when I knew this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a movement. A rebellion against the people who only love you when you're quiet. A rally cry for every girl who ever made herself small so someone else could feel big. And I had only just begun. They say the truth sets you free, but they forget to mention. First, it sets everything on fire. After I posted about Tyler's defamation lawsuit, the internet did what it does best. It exploded. Some people were angry on my behalf. Others were skeptical, asking for proof, demanding names, screenshots, receipts. But most of them listened. Not just to me, but to each other. Twice as Loud wasn't just a podcast anymore. It was a mirror, a place where people finally saw themselves in someone else's silence and began to speak. Still, not everyone was supportive. I lost friends. Friends I'd had for years. People who used to grab drinks with Tyler and me on Friday nights. Now posting vague things like, "People will do anything for attention," or, "It's sad how easy it is to destroy someone's reputation these days." One of them even messaged me directly. "He's not a bad guy, Riley. You're just bitter." I stared at that message for a long time. And you know what? A part of me was bitter, not because I wanted revenge, but because I had spent years being invisible in front of people who claimed to care, and now when I finally found my voice, they couldn't recognize me anymore. But I wasn't speaking for them. I wasn't speaking for Tyler. I was speaking and for every girl who'd ever heard the words, "You can't do this without me." So I kept talking. My lawyer, Andrea, God bless her, was a power. She looked over the lawsuit, raised an eyebrow, and said, "It's all bluff. No court will take this seriously. But that doesn't mean we can't use it." "Use it?" I asked. She smiled. "You're not the one on trial here, Riley. He is. In the court of public opinion, he's trying to control the narrative. But you've already taken that power away. All you have to do is stay honest." So I did. The next episode of Twice as Loud was called Honest to a Fault. It wasn't angry. It wasn't spiteful. It was real. I talked about the subtle things. The invisible bruises. How he'd mock my voice in private, but compliment it in public. How he'd forget to credit my work, but insist he was building my career. How I thought love meant compromise, until I realized I was the only one compromising. I said, "He never hit me. He never screamed. He just slowly turned down the volume on who I was, until I forgot I had the power to turn it back up." That episode went even more viral than the last. Major outlets picked it up. Interviews flooded in. My follower count tripled in a week, but more than that, my inbox filled with stories, hundreds, thousands, people from every walk of life telling me, "That was me. My boss did this. My boyfriend still does this. My mother made me feel like I was never enough." It was overwhelming, beautiful, heartbreaking, and then the DM that changed everything. It was from a girl named Lila, 23. Her message started simple. "I know who you're talking about. I dated him too." I sat up straight. She didn't say Tyler's name, didn't have to. She described him in chilling detail. The charm, the manipulation, the way he'd convince you your ideas were his, your doubts were yours alone, and your silence was the price of keeping peace. I wrote back immediately, not to pry but to thank her, to tell her she wasn't alone. She replied with a voice note. Her voice shook as she said, "I used to think I was crazy, but listening to your podcast, I finally feel sane again. You gave me language for something I couldn't name." I cried listening to that, because for the first time, I truly understood the difference between revenge and healing. Revenge is loud, sharp. It wants the world to see your pain. Healing is quiet, but deeper. It shows you your pain was real, and that it didn't kill you. A few days later, another message came in. This one from a journalist. She said she was doing a feature on digital survivors, women reclaiming the mic, and wanted me to be the headline story. My first instinct was panic. A headline story? Me? But then I remembered, I used to be the girl who thought her voice only mattered when it echoed his. Now I was the girl whose story echoed across the internet and helped other women find theirs. I said yes. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. The journalist, Maya, was sharp, curious, kind. She asked all the right questions, but never pushed too hard. She said, "What made you finally leave?" And I paused. Because it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't a big dramatic blow-up. It was a slow death. 1,000 little silences. And then one day, a whisper that said, "You don't have to do this anymore." So I told her that. I said, I left the day I realized I didn't recognize my own voice. She nodded slowly. That's powerful. When the article dropped a week later, the title was She Took the Mic Back and Brought Thousands with Her. It was surreal. My photo was on the homepage of a major outlet. Me, the girl who used to read her podcast scripts in the bathroom mirror because she was too scared to speak them out loud. And guess who finally reached out? Tyler. Again. This time, through email. No lawsuit talk. No name calling. Just a short, cutting line. Hope the attention's worth what you've become. I didn't respond. But if I had, I would have said, I became someone you can't silence anymore. Because by then, Twice as Loud had evolved. It wasn't just a solo podcast. It was a platform. I started inviting guests. Not celebrities. Not influencers. Just people with stories. A girl who got fired after reporting harassment. A trans man whose voice deepened, but whose job still treated him like he was invisible. A single mom who left a religious cult and had to rebuild her entire life from scratch. People who'd been told their voices were too much. People who were done apologizing. I created a segment called Mic Check, a space where listeners could send in audio clips about a time they were silenced and how they got their voice back. The response was unbelievable. Suddenly, this little show recorded under a blanket in my bedroom was changing lives, but with growth came more visibility, more pressure, more eyes watching me, waiting for me to mess up. And that terrified me. What if I said something wrong? What if I got canceled? What if Tyler found a way to twist my words again? That fear almost stopped me from taking the next big step. I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment summit in New York. All expenses paid. Keynote spot. Hundreds of attendees. Me, on a stage. Tyler used to say I wasn't built for public speaking. That my voice wasn't strong enough to carry a room. But this wasn't his room anymore. So I stood up there, hands shaking, heart racing, and told my story. Start to finish. No filters, no shame. I looked out at that sea of faces and said, you don't have to earn the right to be heard. You are the right. The standing ovation felt surreal. But the quiet moment after, when a young girl in the front row walked up to me, hugged me, and whispered, you made me believe in myself again. That's the one I'll never forget, because it wasn't just about being louder than Tyler anymore. It was about helping others raise their own volume. And I wasn't done yet. People think success erases the scars, that once the spotlight's on you, all the darkness that came before just fades. But the truth, the spotlight doesn't heal you. It exposes you. And standing there on that summit stage, eyes blinking against the lights, hands still trembling from the applause, I realized something. I had finally become everything Tyler said I couldn't be, and yet, I still carried him with me. Not by choice, not out of love, but like a shadow that follows even on your brightest days. After the summit, things moved fast. Twice as Loud signed its first sponsor, an ethical clothing brand, founded by survivors. Then came a literary agent who said, have you ever thought of writing a book? A book? I laughed when she said it. Me? I'm not a writer? She smiled gently. That's what every writer says, right before they change the world. I didn't know if I could change the world, but I knew I could tell the truth. So I said yes. The proposal took months, draft after draft, chapter outlines, sample essays, late-night voice notes to myself. When memories surfaced, I didn't know I'd buried. I wrote about things I had never said out loud before, like the time Tyler threw away my journal and said, some things are better left unspoken, or the night he accidentally booked a guest I had once told him made me uncomfortable, and how I still thanked him afterward, because that's what I thought love was. But love doesn't erase you, it sees you, all of you, and for the first time in my life, I was seeing me too. I finished the proposal in March, my agent sent it out, and within weeks we had 3 offers. 3, me, the girl who used to sit in a soundproofed room, whispering her truth behind a man who called it noise. Now, they wanted to print my voice. The day I signed the deal, I went out alone. No celebration, no dinner with friends, just me and a small cafe in the corner of my neighborhood. I ordered a hot chocolate, sat by the window, watched the sun start to dip behind the rooftops, and I cried. Not out of sadness, not out of fear, out of sheer, overwhelming relief, because I had been holding my breath for years, waiting for someone to give me permission to be loud. And I finally realized I never needed it. But of course, the peace didn't last long. Tyler resurfaced again. This time, it wasn't a message. It wasn't a legal threat. It was a podcast, a brand new show. Same studio, same aesthetic, same tone. And in the first episode, he said, I created a platform that others tried to steal. But I'm back, and the truth always wins. He didn't use my name. He never did. That was his trick. But the shade was unmistakable. He had rebranded himself as the true originator of Twice as Loud's success. He called it volume control, like he was taunting me. And the worst part? People listened. His first episode charted within a day. His followers returned. Some even tagged me with comments like, looks like someone's jealous. Or, you built your brand on his back. It stung. Even after all this time, even after the standing ovations and sponsor deals and letters from survivors who said I saved them, some part of me still froze when people chose to believe him. My therapist, Marlene, said something that helped. She said, abusers don't stop when you leave. They stop when they lose control, and control can look like public perception. She was right. Tyler didn't want me back. He wanted me under him, beneath his voice, behind his image, smaller than his ego. But I wasn't her anymore. I wasn't the girl who sat quiet in the recording booth while he talked over me. I wasn't the girlfriend who apologized for having ideas. I was Riley Bennett, author, host, advocate, survivor, and I was done pretending his noise was louder than my truth. So I responded. Not with drama, not with a call-out, but with an episode titled Volume Isn't Power. Voice is, I said. Anyone can raise their volume, shout into a mic, flood the airwaves. But voice is earned. It's built from pain, from rising again after someone convinces you you're nothing. And if someone's trying this hard to discredit you, it's probably because they can't be you. The message was clear, calm, sharp, and it cut deeper than any rant ever could. The episode became the most shared one I'd ever done. People quoted it, stitched it, pinned it. One woman tweeted, she didn't burn him, she lit a candle for every girl still sitting in the dark. That one made me cry. Because I didn't start this to destroy anyone. I started it to recover myself. And now, without meaning to, I was helping others do the same. Lola, remember her? The girl who messaged me said she dated Tyler too? She reached out again. This time with an invitation. She was launching a nonprofit for survivors of emotional abuse, peer-led workshops, legal resources, community events. She said, it wouldn't exist without your podcast. And she asked if I would be the keynote speaker for the launch. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. The event was held in an old converted warehouse turned community center. Exposed brick, string lights, rows of mismatched chairs. It was raw, imperfect, alive, just like us. I stood on that stage and looked out at rows of people, some with tears in their eyes, some smiling so wide it hurt, and I knew this was louder than any courtroom, bigger than any show, more lasting than any podcast chart. Because we weren't just speaking, we were being heard. After my speech, Lila hugged me. She whispered, you gave me my voice back. So now I'm giving others theirs. And I thought, this is what Tyler could never understand. He thought control was power, that muting someone made him strong. But real power, it's handing someone the mic. It's telling them, I believe you, and watching what happens when they finally believe in themselves. That night, as I packed up to leave, I got a call from Andrea, my lawyer. I stepped outside into the cool night air, phone pressed to my ear. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice buzzing with energy. The lawsuit dropped. I froze. Dropped? I repeated. Completely. No explanation, no settlement. Just vanished. I stood there under the string lights, breath caught in my throat. It was over. Tyler had tried to silence me, shame me, sue me. And in the end, he couldn't hold on to any of it, because the truth has a way of echoing. And once it's out there, you can't unhear it. I sat on the curb that night, looking up at the stars. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not because I had won, but because I had let go of fear, of shame, of him. And I knew this was only the beginning. You'd think freedom would feel like fireworks, like a grand cinematic moment, tears falling, fists raised, dramatic music in the background. But when you finally let go of someone who's lived inside your head for years, it's quieter than you expect. It's a deep breath that doesn't shake. It's looking in the mirror and recognizing your own eyes again. It's waking up without wondering what version of yourself will be acceptable today. After Tyler dropped the lawsuit, I thought I'd feel powerful, but what I felt was peace, and that was even better. I didn't post about it right away. I didn't need to. My audience had watched the journey. They saw the battle unfold in real time. The dropped case wasn't the win. I was. The girl I had become. The girl who didn't flinch when someone said, "You're being dramatic." The girl who didn't apologize for her voice taking up space. Still, I felt a strange emptiness in the days that followed. Not grief, not sadness, just a pause. For years, so much of my life had been about him. First trying to please him, then trying to recover from him, then standing up to him. Now, there was no more fighting to do. So who was I without the fight? That question sat with me for a while, until one morning I got an email that answered it. It was from a high school in Seattle. A teacher named Mrs. Carter wrote, "Our senior girls have been listening to your podcast in our media literacy class. They're obsessed. Last week one of them said, 'I want to be like Riley.'" She made herself loud without being mean. I've never seen them respond to anything like this. "If you ever find yourself near Washington, we'd love to have you speak." I read that message 3 times. Not a brand deal, not a conference, not a headline-grabbing event. Just a room full of teenage girls who had found themselves in my voice. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I booked a flight. It wasn't glamorous, just a budget airline, a worn backpack, and a few index cards I scribbled on in the hotel the night before. But when I walked into that classroom, 25 young women with notebooks in their laps and fire in their eyes, I felt more nervous than I ever had. Because I saw myself in them, and I didn't want to mess it up. I told them my story, not the version shaped for social media, the messy one, the scared one, the one who stayed when she should have walked, the one who whispered before she ever learned how to shout. And then I asked them, "What would you do if no one told you to be smaller?" The room went quiet. Then one by one, hands went up. I'd audition for the lead in our play instead of working backstage. I'd apply to that art school my mom says is a waste of money. I'd break up with the guy who tells me I'm lucky he puts up with me. Their voices cracked, but they didn't back down. And I knew this was why I started. It was never about punishing Tyler. It was about interrupting a cycle, about making sure no one else mistook being diminished for being loved. When I left that day, Mrs. Carter walked me to the parking lot. She said, "I don't think you realize how much you matter to them." I smiled. I think I'm finally starting to. After that trip, something shifted. Twice as Loud started to focus more on others, less about my story, more about what came after, the rebuilding, the rediscovery, the joy. I launched a new series called Unmuted, mini interviews with everyday people who'd overcome emotional control in some form. A girl who left a cult. A man whose father never let him cry. A non-binary teen kicked out for wearing nail polish who now led school assemblies on gender expression. These weren't sob stories. They were power stories. Each one reminded me that healing isn't linear, and it's never too late to rewrite the narrative. The show doubled in size again. Brands wanted ad space. Streaming platforms made offers. One even pitched me a docuseries, but I turned that one down, because some stories lose their soul when turned into spectacle. And mine was still healing. Meanwhile, Tyler's podcast Volume Control began to crumble. His early traction died out. The episodes started sounding bitter, erratic. He began calling out unnamed ex-partners, liars, and copycats in every other recording. Eventually, his co-host left, then the sponsors, then the audience. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't even mention it publicly, because by then he wasn't even a whisper in my world anymore. And that was the best revenge of all, moving on so far he couldn't follow. One day, I was walking through a bookstore in Brooklyn when I saw something that stopped me cold. It was my book, sitting face out on a table under the sign Voices That Changed the Game. I picked it up, held it in my hands like it might vanish. Flipped to the dedication. For every girl who thought being quiet would keep her safe. Speak loudly. Always. I ran my finger over the words chest tight. Then I heard a voice behind me. A soft gasp. Are you Riley Bennett? I turned. A girl, maybe 18, 19, was standing there with wide eyes and trembling hands. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to bother you. I recognized your voice. From the podcast. I smiled. You're not bothering me. She stepped closer, eyes glossy. You helped me leave my ex. He said I was too emotional, too needy. I used to believe him. Then, I heard you talk about how love should make you bigger, not smaller, and I left. I'm in school now. For communications. My throat tightened. I don't even know how to thank you, she whispered. You just did. We hugged. Right there, between the shelves. And I thought, this is the legacy Tyler can't touch. Not the book, not the fame. But her, that girl, that light. The lives that bloomed because I refused to stay quiet. I left the bookstore in tears. Happy ones this time. And that night, I recorded a bonus episode. Just a short one. No script. No polish. I said, to the girl who still hears his voice in her head, I hear you louder. To the woman who's rebuilding her life from the dust of someone else's ego, I see your bricks. And to the one who thinks she's too broken to be bold, your voice is the sharpest thing about you. Keep speaking. Keep rising. Be twice as loud. And then I closed the episode with silence. 10 full seconds of nothing. Because sometimes the most powerful sound in the world is the one you used to be afraid of, your own. Healing isn't a straight line, it's a circle. You think you've outrun the past, that you've climbed high enough, far enough, but then one day, something pulls you back to where it all began. For me, it was a voicemail. I was in the middle of editing an interview for the next unmuted episode when my phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost let it go, but something told me to listen. I pressed play. Riley? I'm not sure why I'm calling. I guess I heard your name somewhere. I was driving past the old studio, thought of you. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing okay. That's all. It was Tyler. I didn't expect the wave that hit me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sadness. It was confusion, a strange hollow ache I hadn't felt in a long time. Because even after everything, even after the lawsuit, the gaslighting, the undermining, I had loved him once. That's the part no one talks about. You don't just walk away from trauma with fists raised and anger in your chest. Sometimes you walk away with a lump in your throat and 1,000 unanswered questions. And sometimes, those questions still hurt. Why now? Why apologize? What does he want? I sat with that voicemail for days, didn't respond, didn't delete it either. I played it back twice, once as Riley from 5 years ago, the one who would have heard hope in his voice, then again as the woman I am now. And I heard something different, not regret, just discomfort. He didn't want to be forgiven. He wanted to feel better, and that wasn't mine to give. So I never called back. Instead, I recorded an episode called The Sorry We'll Never Hear. I said, sometimes closure doesn't come in a phone call. Sometimes the people who hurt us say sorry to clear their own conscience, not to make us whole. And sometimes we have to forgive ourselves for needing that sorry in the first place. It was one of my most downloaded episodes ever. I think because everyone has a Tyler, a person who did damage, then circled back years later looking for redemption. But only if it was convenient, only if it didn't cost them anything. That episode opened floodgates. People started sending in their own unheard apologies. I read them aloud in a follow-up segment. A girl whose father walked out when she was 6. A man whose ex stole from him and never looked back. A mother whose teenage son said cruel things she never dared repeat until she wrote them down, forgave him, and moved forward. Every message reminded me, we are all survivors of something, and no one heals the same way. But healing becomes easier when we do it together. Around that time, I was invited to host a panel at a major media convention, one centered around the future of storytelling. The lineup was intimidating. Big names, best-selling authors, streaming execs, and me, the girl who once recorded under a blanket in her bedroom. I almost declined. But then I remembered who I was before Twice as Loud, and how badly she would have needed to see this version of me standing on a stage. So I said yes. The day of the panel, I wore a soft gray suit. Simple, strong, no heels, just black sneakers that grounded me in the girl who used to walk out of Tyler's studio barefoot because it was quieting to his process. I stepped onto that stage with no notes, just truth. And I told the audience, the future of storytelling doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the most honest one. There was a moment of stillness in the room, then a ripple of applause that grew and grew. Not because I said something clever, because I said something true. After the panel, a woman from a streaming company approached me. She said they'd been watching the growth of Twice as Loud and wanted to talk about adapting it, not just as a podcast, but as a limited series. I froze. A series? She handed me her card. We don't want to sensationalize it. We want to honor it, and we want you to be the voice behind it. I walked out of that building in a daze. My phone buzzed with text from friends who watched the panel live, messages from listeners cheering me on, but all I could think about was the silence after Tyler's voicemail, the silence that used to terrify me, and now it was mine. That night, I didn't go out to celebrate. I sat on my balcony with a cup of chamomile tea and watched the city lights flicker across the skyline. I thought about the studio I once begged to be heard in, the apartment I now filled with my voice freely, the girl I used to be, who whispered, maybe I'm too much, and the woman I am now, who knows she'll never be too little again. I sent a voice note to Lila that night. If this series happens, I want you involved. I want it to start with our stories, the ones that didn't fit the mold, the ones people told us were too soft, too personal, too complicated. She replied 2 minutes later, you got it, let's make noise. And that's the thing. I used to think survival meant staying quiet, keeping my head down, not making waves. Now I know survival is a role. It's a chorus of stories that were never supposed to be told, and we're telling them anyway. Everywhere I go, no, every city, every room, I hear echoes of girls who once thought their voices didn't matter. They matter. You matter. And the louder we become, the harder it is for the world to pretend we were ever silent. It's funny how your life can look completely different and still carry the same voice inside you. Only now, that voice is mine. It's been 2 years since I started Twice as Loud. 2 years since I walked out of a studio built on silence and created something I was never supposed to survive, let alone thrive in. And today, I sit in my own recording space. Soft lighting, warm colors, a worn couch I thrifted with Lila when we moved into the office together. A sign on the wall says your voice isn't too much. It's the sound of you growing. There's a mic in front of me, but I don't use it to please anyone anymore. I use it to remember, to tell the truth, to listen, to build. And as I sit here, about to record the first episode of Twice as Loud Season 3, I'm not thinking about Tyler. I'm thinking about the girl I used to be. The one who thought love meant shrinking. The one who whispered apologies just for existing too loudly in someone else's space. I'm thinking about how far she's come and how far we've all come. Because what started as my voice became so much more. When the book came out, I thought that was the peak. But then the unmuted tour happened. 12 cities, packed venue, dozens of guest storytellers, some who had never touched a mic before, some who shook through every word, some who stood tall like they were born to take the stage. One of them was a high school girl from Minneapolis, 15, tiny frame, fierce eyes. She stood in front of a crowd of 300 and said, "My stepdad said I talk too much, that I'm annoying, but I talk anyway, because Riley taught me my voice is not a problem. It's a power." The crowd erupted. I sat in the front row and cried. Right there. No shame. Because this was why I kept going. It was never about erasing what happened. It was about amplifying what comes next. And yet there were moments I didn't see coming. Moments like the morning, the docuseries premiere. I was alone in my apartment, curled up on the couch in my favorite sweatshirt, holding a warm mug of coffee with shaky hands. I watched the opening scene, an actress playing me, walking into that old studio with nervous eyes and a soft voice. Then I heard the narrator, me, my voice, older now, stronger. I said, "This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about reclamation, about what happens when you take back what someone convinced you was never yours." And I wept, not because it hurt, because it finally stopped hurting. The series exploded, critical acclaim, awards buzz, press interviews I never imagined giving. I sat on late-night couches and told my story to millions, not to relive the trauma, but to remind others that trauma doesn't get the last word. We do. I was even invited to return to my alma mater and give the commencement speech. Standing there in that cap and gown, looking out at thousands of hopeful faces, I said, "Someone once told me I couldn't do it without him, so I did it twice as loud. And I learned that your greatest weapon isn't anger, it's your truth. Say it. Sing it. Shout it. Your voice is the only thing in this world no one can take unless you give it away." They stood for me, my professors, my old classmates, even the dean who once said podcasting was a fading trend. Funny how things come full circle. Speaking of full circle, I ran into Tyler again. It wasn't planned, it wasn't dramatic, it was a coffee shop downtown, one I rarely went to anymore. I was grabbing a drink before a speaking event when I looked up from the counter, and there he was, alone, waiting for his order, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit right anymore. Eyes tired. He saw me. His face froze. We locked eyes for a second. Maybe two. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But I nodded. Just once. Not because I forgave him, not because he earned my kindness, but because I didn't owe him my rage anymore either. I had healed past the point of needing him to see me. I already saw myself. That moment gave me more closure than any voicemail ever could. Later that night, I told the story on stage, lighthearted, honest. I said, "When you stop waiting for an apology, you realize the best revenge is peace." The crowd laughed, cheered, but the truth is, it wasn't about revenge anymore. Hasn't been for a long time. It was about volume. Mine. Yours. Ours. It was about the girl in the back of the classroom who finally raised her hand, the woman in the abusive marriage who hit play on my podcast and finally made a plan to leave, the mother who didn't understand her daughter until she heard an episode about silencing girls for their own good. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who's ever been told they're too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too loud. We are not too anything. We are exactly enough. And if my journey taught me anything, it's this. There will always be people who try to dim you, who are intimidated by how brightly you burn, but the ones worth keeping are the ones who hand you the match. Now as I press record on season 3, I smile, because I know this mic isn't just a tool, it's a torch. and I intend to keep passing it forward. Welcome to Twice as Loud, Season 3, I say into the mic, my voice steady and clear. Today, we begin not with a guest, not with a story, but with a reminder. You were never too loud, they were just afraid of what you had to say. And now, we're saying it anyway, to get louder than ever.